is, in a certain type of left-wing ideology, the belief that ideas don't really matter and that we're really just warring groups that must clobber each other over the head, which is why you're seeing the increased violence there. I think you saw this not only in the horrific assassination of Charlie, but in the reactions that came afterward. We all saw it, and they're reflected in other public opinion surveys relating to approval of violence. So it would appear that this is not merely a matter of some fringe actors, some extremists who simply have an emotional problem, as has been suggested here today. This would seem to be clearly an ideological issue at every level of the American left, which needs to be addressed accordingly, or else we're just twiddling our thumbs. We are not doing anything to solve the problem.
So today, Senate Republicans invited the prominent conservative commentator Michael Knowles to testify in a committee hearing on the subject of political violence. Knowles, much like Charlie Kirk, has been a prominent figure with these campus tours and has faced plenty of his own threats and attack incidents from insane leftists. Now, I gotta say, on a certain level, this was kind of personally gratifying to watch because essentially, every single argument we've been trying to make for the past several months about left-wing violence, about the Democrat Party's very close endorsing relationship with it, and of course, the blatant refusal by their politicians to disavow or condemn the people actually committing or espousing the violence, that was all spoken essentially as we have been trying to articulate it in the halls of U.S. government, and I think that was a very good thing, not just for the conservative movement, but for the country as a whole. But that said, I do have to express that I think the single most telling aspect of this hearing was not what happened, but what didn't happen. Because if you notice something about all of the empty chairs on the certain side of the aisle here, it does appear that basically no Democrat senators even showed up or bothered to participate in the, again, hearing on political violence. The only one we can document thus far appears to be Cory Booker, who basically showed up for a few minutes. Once Knowles started talking, he stormed out of the building, and Knowles did not even get a chance to respond to him in front of his face. And I just have to say, doesn't that tell you everything you need to know? From the supposedly peaceful party that really does condemn political violence, they won't even show up to a committee hearing on it. Much less will they go out and say, you know, Michael, I agree with you. We may have different policy prescriptions on issues, but yes, violence is something that should and is condemned by the Democrat Party. Or even, if you want to disagree with Knowles' caricature or articulation of these issues, you want to disagree with his position, then why not use that platform as a senator to argue, to debate, to ask those questions? But of course, they will not even do that. Why? Because there is no argument they can have. It is a pretty naked admission indeed. This is the party of political violence. And frankly, far from saying, oh, you know, we don't let the radicals run our show. No, the radicals do absolutely run their show. And I would say that if a single Democrat senator truly got up there and said, I agree with you, Michael, they would not be celebrated by their base. They'd probably be condemned by the very violent people who are attacking others on campuses and out in the streets and all of this garbage. So with that said, guys, in today's video, I want to show you this full exchange. I'll play for you some of the, again, very brilliantly put and, you know, true and relevant statements made by Knowles, as well as show you apparently what happened here with Cory Booker. Again, the only Democrat who shows up then just leaves. That's their standpoint on political violence, by the way, and a lot more. So guys, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is not only the best way to support our work, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, I want to show you some of the opening aspects of Knowles' testimony here, because again, really does summarize a lot of the points we've been trying to make about, for instance, the false equivalency. They try to say right-wingers commit more political violence than left-wingers, and yet you never really hear about right-wing violence from the very left-wing media. Why is that? Because that number is completely manufactured. Okay, the ADL statistic, for instance, does not really document left-wing violence, and then they count prison violence, for instance, as right-wing violence. It's just like ridiculous. And, you know, again, this is what we've been saying, and take a listen to what Michael Knowles had to say.
We're suggested that we condemn political violence, which surely we must all do. But then he suggested that we not try to pinpoint exactly which side the violence comes from. This seems to me confusing and misbegotten, as one cannot solve a problem if one does not know where the problem lies. In light of the murder of my friend Charlie Kirk by a leftist assassin, I am gratified to see that at least some members of our federal legislature are now confronting the consistent and escalating pattern of left-wing terrorism in the country. Lest I be accused of partisan invective, on September 23rd, no less an emblem of American liberalism than The Atlantic magazine published an article citing a recent study from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, admitting that the left is more violent today than the right. Less honest liberals, including members of Congress, continue to deny this fact. Democrat Congressman Seth Moulton, for example, reacted to Charlie's assassination by blaming the right. Congressman Moulton claimed that 3/4 of political violence in the United States comes from the right, while only 4% comes from the left. That claim struck me, as it probably does many of you, as suspect. So I looked into just a few recent examples that came to mind of prominent left-on-right violence. The Covenant School Massacre in Nashville, in which a trans-identifying shooter murdered Christian school children after outlining her ideological motivations. According to authorities, there was no ideological motive there. Go figure. The Black Lives Matter riots, overtly leftist demonstrations that left dozens of people dead and over $1 billion worth of property damage. Likewise, those fail to show up on registers of left-wing political violence. Even an attack by Antifa that targeted me personally, as well as conservative college students for our political views, appeared in official records and data sets as nothing more than obstructing law enforcement. It turns out the left commits relatively little political violence when you don't count the political violence that the left commits. I am here today to speak about that single illustrative incident. On April 18, 2023, I was invited to participate in a debate at the University of Pittsburgh on the topic of transgenderism. Before the debate, several hundred left-wing protesters gathered outside the student center, many dressed uniformly in black with face coverings. They lit the street on fire while burning me in effigy with a little Hitler mustache painted on my face. All because I hold the view, as most Americans do, that men cannot become women. Buildings in the area were placed on a soft lockdown. As the Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire put out my burning effigy, an Antifa operative named Brian DePippa, hiding behind his wife, Crystal, rolled 2 smoke bombs under police barricades. Attendees scattered while demonstrators chanted, "Fascists go home." DePippa then threw a lit firework into a group of police officers protecting the building. The explosion injured several officers, including severe and life-altering injuries to a female officer.
Right, and does that ever get talked about? You know, Charlottesville is still mentioned heavily by leftist figures and Democrat politicians to this day. And yet, when you truly delve into the incidents of left-wing violence, you can basically pinpoint almost every single year over the past decade where something similar to Charlottesville was committed by the left, and yet very little conversation about it. No one even talks about this, by the way. I mean, it sounds to me like a pretty serious situation, right? You're on a college campus in the United States of America. This is where parents send their kids, you know, thinking they're going to be safe and get an education. You just got Antifa terrorists throwing bombs at people, you know, burning stuff out in the streets, right? Assaulting people. And that point we've raised about the so-called statistics about left-wing versus right-wing violence that, again, seem to totally mismatch the reality of what we hear about in the news is also well and accurately put by Michael Knowles, right? The vast majority of actual left-wing terrorist attacks, as you hear, by the way, are not even counted in them. The ADL certainly does not put it in their statistics where they try to claim right-wingers commit the overwhelming majority of violence. Again, they count things like the Aryan Brotherhood in prison assaulting other members of the prison. That's right-wing political violence. It's not even happening, right, in general society, but you look at it, it's like the vast majority of that. Anytime there's an interracial crime committed by a white person, they label that far-right violence. But do you think they do that in the reverse, right? Is black on white hate crime considered left-wing violence? No, absolutely not. Are BLM riots left-wing violence? No, as a matter of fact, to the Democrat Party, to this very day, they still will not actually admit even that Tyler Robinson, the very obviously leftist Charlie Kirk shooter, was leftist. So yeah, absolutely, right? If you just simply do not count any left-wing violence as left-wing violence, then you can easily sit there and say, well, the right wing actually commits more of this stuff. But we know, obviously, that that is not the case. And, you know, as I brought up, notice how none of the Democrat senators actually show up to dispute or argue with it because they simply can't. And here's another thing to keep in mind. It is only just now recently, ever since Trump post Charlie Kirk has really instilled this crackdown, is the FBI now even really monitoring or tracking Antifa and left-wing violence, which is something, frankly, very shocking and abysmal to think about. But it also backs up further, right? The idea here that, well, how do you know that the left wing doesn't commit more violence when you don't even pay attention to left-wing violence? Okay, take a listen. This is actually very important. They're just starting now to track this stuff within the FBI, but we have these fake pseudoscientists, these pseudo-social scientists claiming, oh, we know what we're doing. No, it's obviously the right wing. No, it's not. It's bogus. It was made up for a political narrative, and that is now coming apart. Because everyone saw what happened on September 10th, and everyone has since seen what has happened ever since. So
we've charged some conspiracies. We are looking at RICO, but really the FBI is just getting its hands around the Antifa. Up until the president and the Attorney General, Pam Bondi's been so aggressive on this, up until they've made Antifa a domestic organization, I have to tell you, Laura, they weren't taking them very seriously. They were just saying, you know what, these are just some vandalizers, some small assaults, we'll let the states handle them. The FBI did not take them seriously until this new administration. So we are now getting up to speed on those investigations and doing intelligence and applying other assets to figure out how they work and who they are.
Right. Well, here is the point I've made over and over again for the past several months. The Democrat Party can say all they want that they vaguely and broadly condemn political violence. But first of all, if they will not acknowledge the people, as Michael Knowles, by the way, brought up, who are committing the political violence, if they will not condemn the people, then is it really a condemnation of political violence? After all, we bring up Antifa, who I've established time and time again, is a violent, communist, paramilitary organization. And what do the Democrats do? Well, for a while they said Antifa was just an idea. Now they're even going so far as to say that the idea of Antifa simply means anti-fascism, and therefore they're actually the good guys. So a pretty naked defense, actually, of Antifa. And you see what is going on there. It goes even deeper into administration policy. For instance, the Biden administration was basically not even using the FBI at all to track or target or investigate left-wing politically motivated political violence. So again, what ought to be the end conclusion of that? Well, very simply put, right? Yes, there is not that much distance between the Democrat Party and Antifa. It's superficial, right? Democrats can say, oh, we're this pro-democracy, neoliberal party. We're like kind of politically moderate in the grand scheme of things. We don't associate with the communists in the streets. They're not us. But clearly they are, and you are them. Doesn't matter if you even vote together in the election. You are serving each other's purpose. You are doing each other's bidding. There's a reason why whenever you take power, for instance, in the halls of government, the power in the streets is suddenly handed over to the Antifa. And by the way, perhaps one of the most telling mask-off moments in recent history has not just been the Charlie Kirk assassination and the way prominent Democrats have reacted to that. But how about the very Jay Jones situation, right? The violent, murderous guy running for Attorney General of Virginia, who still to this day has not been fully disavowed or condemned by a single national prominent Democrat. And in today's hearing, as I brought up, right, Cory Booker appears to have just fled. Okay, he just ran out of the room before Michael Knowles actually had the ability to call him out for continuing to endorse this very man that called for the murder of Republicans and our kids. And what did he do? Again, fled the room because he doesn't want to confront this. Why is that? Is it because he's telling lies? Certainly that couldn't be the case, because we've seen a million different times, right? Not even saying they were saying lies, but where these Democrats try to grandstand and make these big performances out of, we're going to grill RFK Jr., we're going to grill this cabinet official. Yet, interestingly, with Michael Knowles, they all ran away in fear. Why could that be? It's almost like he's right. Right? But take a listen.
I think Senator Booker made a good point just a moment ago when he said we have to self-examine. We have to be introspective. And, I can't help but think of a line today. Jay Jones has the vision, commitment, and integrity to keep families safe and make sure every Virginian gets a fair shake in the justice system. I'll be working every day to ensure Jay wins this race. That's the endorsement of Senator Booker for a man who would seek to be the Attorney General of Virginia. This is a man who, if people have not been reading the news, has called for a Republican to be murdered, for his children to be murdered, for the children to die in their mother's arms in order to persuade the Republican to change his policy views, and a man who says that he would urinate on the graves of multiple Republicans. Senator Booker, in this spirit of introspection, is standing by this endorsement. So I suppose I would invite, well, perhaps I should have looked, because Senator Booker has left the room, and I think I can guess why. Senator Booker, I think, should practice what he preaches, because this is the kind of moment. You cannot have a professor who wants to teach students and is going to desire to kill half of them. You certainly cannot have law enforcement officers who would engage in this kind of violent rhetoric against half of their constituents. So long as anyone stands by an endorsement such as that, their words are meaningless. They are shedding crocodile tears on the topic of political violence.
Well, I guess he's not Spartacus anymore. He's Runawayist, because that's not how Mr. Spartacus would have handled a situation like that. Notice, too, by the way, Cory Booker is one of the likely 2028 Democrat presidential candidates. And a lot of these Democrats for months now, Tim Walz, Cory Booker, and others have basically said that the Republicans can't confront what they're actually doing. You know, they won't come to these town halls. They won't talk to the voters, as they simply just do friendly media interviews 24/7, where they get to just spew a bunch of common talking points about Medicaid and all this garbage. Notice how Democrat senators, these supposed great communicators, you know, they're so right on the issues, actually react when they're confronted by someone who knows what they're talking about and has the ability to make a real argument. And it's not CNN asking, well, you know, what do you think about Medicaid or something? They run out of the room. Many such cases, right? And yes, it is a genuine. Notice that too. Instead of being willing to simply confront the question of Cory Booker, of Jay Jones, I should say, Cory Booker just runs away. There you go. Greatest summary, right? In the moment where, yes, Democrats are being asked, as politicians, do you condemn political violence in a sincere sense? What do? Instead of answering the question, walk out of the room. Very well put there. And I think, frankly, that the next point here Michael Knowles is about to make summarizes the reason why. It's not just that, you know, Democrat politicians endorse the violence, which I think they do. They secretly support this stuff. But there's also, I think, a double component to it, where they're also scared of the violent radical leftist voters that we've seen time and time again. I think a prime example that you might point to of recent political scandals is not just Jay Jones, but of Maine Senate candidate Graham Plattner. I like to call this guy Operation Barbarossa, because he's the one who said in Reddit post 4 years ago openly that he's a communist. He just said he's a communist, and then now he's the leading frontrunner, right? And also has a Nazi tattoo on his chest. So, you know, you're like, okay, which side of Barbarossa? What side on the Eastern Front does he represent? Turns out it's both of them, okay? The party of we're so against political extremism. You know, it's funny. Hitler thought that the Jewish Bolsheviks were, you know, ruining the world. Stalin thought that the capitalist, imperialist, fascists were ruining the world. Turns out the entire time, it was just Maine Democratic voters that were pulling the puppet strings of both sides of that war. But no, in all seriousness, right? How is that guy being rewarded? Is he being castigated out of the race? No. Most recent poll I saw has him at 56%. His challenger, Janet Mills, the incumbent governor of Maine, by the way, right? We're talking about who should be the favorite in this race, only at 24%. So a prime example of exactly what we're talking about, and here's Michael Knowles basically going to explain that pretty well, saying, quote, when a fringe right-winger does something awful, like the Young Republicans, for instance, from that political scandal or whatever, right? He's castigated, thrown into prison as he should be. When a fringe left-winger commits terrorist attacks, sometimes he's given university positions, right? In other words, the Democrat Party and all of the liberal leading cultural institutions do not remotely try to push radicalism out of their ranks. And why is that? Because they are radical. And even if they're not, and they're just too tolerant of it, guess what happens inevitably? When radicals keep growing and growing in size, right? They become the majority, which I would argue basically is the Democrat Party these days. I mean, just look at Graham Plattner, look at Zoran Mondani, look at Omar Fateh over in Minneapolis, many other such cases. But take a listen.
Of course, And, there is appropriate concern, the kind of concern that one would never have on the left because they don't face any threats on college campuses. College campuses are key, though, here, Senator, because when some fringe right-winger does something awful, he's castigated, thrown into prison, as he should be. When a fringe left-winger commits terrorist attacks, sometimes he's given university positions, as happened with the Weather Underground, an organization which blew up part of this very building, and they were rewarded with sinecures at universities.
Boom, exactly. But remember, guys, January 6th, the attack on our sacred democracy. Democrats really believe in preserving the Capitol. Oh, really? Is that why a guy who tried to bomb the Capitol is actually one of your apparent heroes? Tells you a lot. Typical, many such cases. Now, considering we don't have more reaction from the actual Democrat politicians themselves, considering, again, they basically didn't show up, I want to give you actually another prime example of what we are talking about here, which is Gavin Newsom and his relationship with Charlie Kirk. This is something actually brought up at the time that it all happened, right? He basically didn't say anything. He put out one statement about it. He refused to lower the flag to half-staff like many other actually Democrat governors were doing in his honor and to mourn and condemn political violence. And I brought up the fact, Gavin, the way he treated Charlie Kirk in his death, you're talking about someone who came on your show, okay, arguably, and was even criticized at the time for maybe helping to launch your political career by giving him a platform a little bit, right? First guest on your podcast. He's someone your son, you said, according to you, was a big fan of Charlie Kirk, wanted to skip school to go and meet him. And the most that, so you basically, what I'm saying is you knew him better than almost any Democrat politician out there. You had the most personal relationship. And what did we get in response, right? Well, let's put this side by side of what Gavin Newsom said back then in regards to Charlie Kirk and how he's actually just lying about all of that now that Charlie Kirk is dead and is no longer there to defend himself, just throwing him under the bus in his death. Take a listen.
Last night, trying to put my son to bed, he's like, no, Dad, what time? What time's Charlie going to be here? What time? And I'm like, dude, you're in school tomorrow. He's 13. He's like, no. This morning, wakes up at 6 something. He's like, I'm coming. I'm like, he literally would not leave the house.
Did you let him take off school?
No, he did. Of course not. He's not here for a good reason. But the point is
you canceled school for like 2 years. Once one day.
The point is the point, which is you are making a damn dent.
Thank you. I'm kidding.
So that's your son, obviously a fan of Charlie Kirk. What was the conversation like between you and your son after Charlie Kirk was assassinated?
Well, he called me, I don't know how he got a phone, but he called me from school that day, really alarmed. And all his friends were around the phone that wanted me to somehow express or understand what was going on. He wanted to know if he was dead. He wasn't a fan of him as much as he was familiar with him.
He wasn't a fan of him. Now he was just familiar with him. You just said he was a fan. And if we want to believe you misspoke, I don't think that's true. Because according to you, and that's a pretty detailed story, right? Look at how excited your son got when it was announced he would be interviewing Charlie Kirk, assuming that story is even true. Like, we don't really know. I mean, this whole thing could be fake. But if we're going to believe what Gavin Newsom said, yeah, I don't think he was now just familiar. Notice how he's downgrading the relationship. And what is that all about? I think Gavin Newsom's actually the prime example of this. Because Gavin is a sociopath. And I think everyone knows that. The guy doesn't really truly believe anything. He's kind of just a evil, cunning manipulator that goes with the flow of whatever he thinks is popular, okay? And I think what was going on earlier this year when Trump had first taken office is that Gavin seemed to believe there was a vibe shift more moving towards the right wing. Right, there was a lot of talk initially when Trump had first won because the Democrats lost the election so bad about, hey, maybe we should work together on certain things. Maybe we should give Trump a chance. And look at this trend of new media and all that stuff. And they're more open to the right wing. And the cancel culture of the past wasn't really working. So immediately, what was Gavin Newsom doing? So he started the podcast where initially he's interviewing all these right wingers for that very reason, right? Oh, we're going to stop the cancel culture. We're going to show we're willing to talk. We're going to have dialogue. We're going to break into new media, right? So all that stuff happened. Then months later, what does he start to realize? Okay, even if the country did kind of have that mandate and that realignment, look at what's going on in the Democrat Party. That's no longer the vibe in the Democrat Party. The vibe in the Democrat Party is no longer maybe we should be open-minded, maybe we should embrace some of the Trump ideas. Now the vibe is, guess what? Jay Jones. It's Graham Plattner. It's violent Antifa and those people attacking ICE agents and all this stuff. That's what's popular. Zoran Mondani's popular. So now, this absolute sociopath, again, with no principles, doesn't believe anything, is going from saying, Charlie Kirk, my son's a big fan, like, you're really doing something, you're making a difference, to saying, oh, my son is just familiar with him, right? We didn't really have to try to walk back, right? Now that the guy's freaking dead, why is that? Because Gavin Newsom recognizes, oh, my left-wing voter base, many of them genuinely supported, actually probably a majority of them, if we're being honest, genuinely supported the Charlie Kirk assassination. And so therefore, I can no longer seem like I kind of like Charlie or my family likes Charlie. Let me distance myself away. And that, ladies and gentlemen, why I'm bringing this all up, is a prime example of exactly how the radical, violent left has captured the Democrat Party. See exactly what I'm saying? Hopefully that all ties it back together, right? Because either these Democrat politicians like Jay Jones and Graham Plattner, for instance, just openly feel that way. You have other Democrat politicians who are probably scared, right? I think Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, for instance, right now, are trying to starve their own voters who are on SNAP benefits and all that stuff through the government shutdown because they're terrified of the far left. Or you have people like Gavin Newsom, who are just complete sociopaths and just feel like that's where the vibe shift is. And so, again, they're willing to say whatever, no matter how crazy it is. And that's how you end up in that position. And again, prime example of why the Democrat Party has a very close relationship with the violence. Michael Knowles is right. They cannot walk away from it, even if they try to walk out of these Senate hearings, because it is simply true. That said, guys, there you have it. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.